The paper landed on the mahogany desk with a heavy thud. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses and looked directly at my stepfather. The silence in the room was suffocating and thick. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair, but didn't look at me. Gary was the first to speak, his voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. He asked if there was any way to contest the stipulations. Mr. Henderson did not blink or look away from him. He said the trust is explicit regarding the beneficiary's living situation. If I was not living under my father's roof, or with his designated guardian, the funds freeze. But since my father was gone, the designated guardian clause was active. Gary slammed his hand on the desk, making me jump. He said that was ridiculous because they were family. He said I was a minor and belonged in their home. I sat there feeling a cold satisfaction spread through my chest. Just 3 weeks ago they had packed my bags in trash bags. They had told me I was old enough to figure it out. Now that $7 million was on the table, I was suddenly a child again. My mother reached out and tried to touch my arm. I pulled away before her fingers could graze my jacket. She looked hurt and wiped a fresh tear from her cheek. She said they only did what was best for me to teach me independence. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and turned the page. He said the funds were managed by a third-party fiduciary. This meant Gary and my mother would never see a dime for child support. The money was strictly for my education, housing and health, and it would only be released if I confirmed my living arrangements were safe. Gary stood up and paced the small office behind us. He ran a hand through his thinning hair and muttered to himself. He turned back to the lawyer with a fake smile plastered on his face. He asked what would happen if I were legally adopted by him. The room went ice cold, and I felt my breath hitch in my throat. Mr. Henderson paused and looked at me, then back at Gary. He said that adoption would technically alter the legal standing of next of kin. However, the trust had specific anti-loophole provisions created by my father. Gary interrupted him, waving his hand dismissively. He said we are a family and we want to make it official. He said it was time to put the past behind us and move forward. My mother nodded enthusiastically, like a bobblehead doll. She said it was what she always wanted for us to be whole. I looked at her and saw the dollar signs reflected in her eyes. She hadn't called me once since I slept on my friend's couch. She hadn't asked if I had food or money for the bus, but now she was talking about being a whole family. Mr. Henderson closed the folder with a finality that echoed. He said he would need to review the adoption implications in private. He asked us to leave while he prepared the necessary copies. I stood up immediately, wanting to get as far away as possible. Gary blocked the doorway before I could squeeze past him. He looked down at me with that same intimidating glare he used at home, but then his expression softened into something sickeningly sweet. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder and squeezed. He said we should go get some lunch and talk about this. I shrugged his hand off and stepped into the hallway. The office receptionist looked up from her computer with concern. I walked fast towards the elevator, aiming for the exit. My mother's high heels clicked rapidly on the tile floor behind me. She called my name in that high-pitched voice she used for company. I pressed the down button repeatedly, hoping the doors would open. Gary caught up to us, breathing heavily from the short walk. He cornered me against the wall by the elevator bank. He said I needed to stop acting like a brat and listen to reason. He said that money was life-changing for all of us. I finally spoke, and my voice was raspy from disuse. I told him the money was mine, and Dad made sure of it. Gary's face turned purple, and a vein bulged in his neck. He leaned in close so only I could hear his whisper. He said I was a minor, and he could make my life hell. He said if I wanted access to that cash, I needed to cooperate. The elevator dinged and the doors slid open smoothly. I stepped inside and tried to hit the close button. Gary jammed his arm between the doors to stop them from closing. He stepped inside with my mother right on his heels. The ride down to the lobby was agonizingly silent. I stared at the floor, counting the scuffs on the metal. My mother sniffled and said I was breaking her heart. She said my father was manipulating me from the grave. She said Gary loved me like his own son despite everything. I almost laughed out loud at the absurdity of that statement. Gary loved nothing but control and his brand new truck. My dad leaving me money was the ultimate insult to him. We walked out into the bright sunlight of the parking lot. The heat radiating off the asphalt made the air shimmer. I started walking toward the bus stop on the corner. Gary jogged ahead and blocked my path again. He said, "Get in the car. We are going to discuss the adoption." I stopped walking and crossed my arms over my chest. I said I would never let him adopt me in a million years. My mother gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. She said I was being selfish and destroying the family. She said, "Think of your little sister and what this could do for her." They were using my half-sister as leverage now. I felt a pang of guilt because I did love my little sister. But I knew letting Gary win would not help her either. He would burn through that money betting on sports and buying junk. I told him I was going to stay with Dad's friend Uncle Mike. Uncle Mike was the designated guardian mentioned in the trust. Gary's eyes narrowed into slits, and he took a step closer. He said Mike was a loser who couldn't take care of me. He said he would fight for custody in family court. He said no judge would give millions to a kid staying with a bachelor. I knew he was bluffing, but his confidence scared me. My mother grabbed my arm again, harder this time. She said, "Don't do this to me. After all, I have sacrificed." I looked at her and asked what she had sacrificed exactly. She married the man who ruined her marriage within 6 months. She let him throw my stuff on the lawn while she watched TV. She changed the locks before I even got to the end of the street. Her grip loosened as the truth hit her like a slap. I pulled free and started walking away again. Gary yelled that I was making a huge mistake. He yelled that I would be begging to come home soon. I kept walking and didn't look back even once. The bus stop was only a few hundred feet away. I could hear their car door slam shut aggressively. The engine roared to life and tires screeched on the pavement. They sped past me while Gary laid on the horn. I sat on the bench and finally let my hands shake. My phone buzzed in my pocket with a new text message. It was from my mother sending a picture of me and my sister. The caption read, "Don't let money ruin what really matters." I stared at the photo, feeling sick to my stomach. She was trying to gaslight me into signing over my rights. I knew the adoption ploy was their only way in. If Gary adopted me, the biological father clause might be void. They could argue that my dad's trust was outdated. I dialed Uncle Mike's number with trembling fingers. He picked up on the second ring, his voice calm and deep. He asked if the meeting was over and if I was okay. I told him everything that happened in the office and outside. He let out a low whistle and told me to stay put. He said he was leaving work early and coming to get me. He said we needed to talk to his lawyer immediately. I hung up and watched the cars drive by on the main road. A black SUV slowed down as it passed the bus stop. My heart hammered because it looked like Gary's car. It sped up and disappeared around the bend. I realized I was not safe as long as I was out in the open. Gary was desperate, and desperate men did crazy things. I decided to walk to the coffee shop down the block. There were more people there, and cameras everywhere. As I walked, I thought about my dad's last laugh. He knew exactly what kind of people they were. He knew they would turn on me the second he was gone. The trust fund was not just money, it was protection. It was a shield against the poverty they tried to force on me. I ordered a water and sat in the corner facing the door. My phone buzzed again with a text from Gary this time. It said, "We are filling out the adoption papers anyway." It said the judge will see we have provided for you for years. It was a lie, but it still made my stomach churn. They had provided nothing but misery since Dad left. I blocked his number knowing he would just call from hers. Uncle Mike walked in 10 minutes later looking flustered. He was wearing his construction boots and neon vest. He hugged me tight and I almost broke down right there. He said, "You are not going back to that house ever." He ordered me a sandwich and told me to eat. While I ate, he called Mr. Henderson on speakerphone. Mr. Henderson said Gary had already called his office twice. He was demanding copies of the will and the trust deed. Mr. Henderson said he denied the request per confidentiality, but he warned us that they would likely hire their own lawyer. They would try to prove Mike was unfit to be a guardian. They would try to prove I was mentally unstable. Mike looked at me and said, "Let them try." He said he had a clean record and a steady job. He said he had a spare room ready for me since the funeral. We left the coffee shop and got into his truck. I felt a sense of relief being away from that neighborhood, but also a deep fear of the battle to come. Gary was manipulative, and my mother was a pathological liar. They could spin a story that made me look like the villain. We arrived at Mike's house, which was small, but clean. He showed me the room he had set up for me. It had a desk, a bed, and a picture of me and Dad fishing. I sat on the bed and felt the exhaustion crash over me. Mike stood in the doorway and said, "Get some rest, kid." He said we have a big fight ahead of us tomorrow. I nodded and lay down staring at the ceiling fan. I couldn't sleep because my mind was racing with scenarios. What if the judge sided with the biological mother? What if the adoption went through against my will? I heard Mike's voice in the kitchen talking low. He was arguing with someone on the phone. I crept to the door and listened through the crack. She was probably crying and playing the victim again. I heard Mike slam the phone down into the receiver. He walked down the hall and checked the locks on the front door. That sound sent a chill down my spine. He was expecting them to show up here tonight. I went back to bed and wedged a chair under the doorknob. I didn't trust anyone completely, not even Mike yet. My dad used to say, "Trust is earned, not given." The next morning, the sun was barely up when we woke. Mike made coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table. He slid a paper across the table toward me. It was a temporary restraining order application. He said we need to file this before they file for custody. He said it creates a paper trail of their aggression. We drove to the courthouse in silence. The building was looming and gray against the sky. We went through security and found the family court clerk. While we waited in line, I saw a familiar face. Gary was walking out of an office down the hall. He was wearing a suit which looked strange on him. He was talking to a man carrying a briefcase. They didn't see us standing in the line behind a pillar. Mike grabbed my shoulder and pulled me back into the shadows. He whispered that we need to be careful. That man with Gary was a notorious shark lawyer. He was known for getting dirty results in custody cases. My heart sank, knowing they were spending money to get money. They probably took out a loan betting on the trust fund. We filed the paperwork and asked for an emergency hearing. The clerk looked sympathetic when she read the details. She said the judge could see us in 2 hours. We sat on hard wooden benches waiting for our name. My mother walked in 20 minutes later looking frail. She was wearing black like she was still in mourning. It was an act for the court, and everyone knew it. She saw me and her eyes lit up with fake hope. She started walking toward me, arms outstretched. Mike stepped in between us like a human wall. He said, "Stay back, Brenda, or I call the bailiff." She stopped and looked at me over his shoulder. She said, "Please don't let him keep us apart." She said, "We can fix this if you just come home." I stood up and looked her in the eye finally. I said, "You didn't want me when I was broke. I said you only want me now because I am worth millions." She recoiled like I had slapped her in the face. Gary came running over from the hallway. He saw Mike and his fists clenched instantly. He said, "You are kidnapping my son Mike." Mike laughed a dry, humorless sound. He said, "He is not your son Gary. He never was." The bailiff walked over, his hand resting on his belt. He told everyone to lower their voices or leave. Gary straightened his jacket and glared at us. He said, "We will see what the judge says about this." They walked to the other side of the waiting area. I could see Gary whispering angrily to the shark lawyer. The lawyer was looking at me and taking notes. I felt like a bug under a microscope being dissected. Finally, the clerk called my name for the hearing. We walked into the courtroom and took our seats. The judge was an older woman with stern eyes. She read the file in silence for 5 long minutes. She looked over her glasses at my mother and Gary. She asked why the minor was ejected from the home. Gary stood up and buttoned his suit jacket. He said it was a misunderstanding about house rules. He said I ran away and refused to return. I stood up and shouted, "That is a lie." The judge banged her gavel and told me to sit. She asked me to explain my side of the story. I told her about the trash bags and the changed locks. I told her about the text messages saying "good riddance." I saw the judge's face harden as I spoke. She turned to my mother and asked if this was true. My mother started crying again, wiping her eyes. She said she was under a lot of stress with the funeral. She said she didn't mean for it to go so far. The judge did not look impressed with her tears. She asked Gary why he was seeking adoption now. Gary stammered and said he wanted to provide stability. The judge picked up the copy of the trust document. She said, "It seems the stability comes with a price tag." She said the timing is suspiciously convenient. Gary's lawyer stood up and objected. He said his client's motives were purely familial. The judge overruled him with a wave of her hand. She said she was granting temporary guardianship to Mike. She said she was ordering a Child Protective Services investigation. She said no adoption proceedings would start until it was done. Gary looked like he was going to explode. My mother looked at him with panic in her eyes. They knew they were losing their grip on the payday. The judge dismissed us, and I felt a weight lift. But as we walked out, Gary's lawyer stopped us. He handed Mike a business card with a smirk. He said, "This isn't over. We will appeal." He said you can't keep a mother from her child forever. Mike took the card and tore it in half. He dropped the pieces on the floor and walked away. I followed him, feeling stronger than before. We got back to the truck, and I let out a breath. Mike said that was round 1, kid. Good job. He said we need to secure the funds before they try again. He said we were going straight to Mr. Henderson's office. When we arrived, Mr. Henderson was waiting for us. He looked relieved to see Mike with me. He said he had received a cease and desist from Gary. They were trying to freeze the trust assets. Mr. Henderson said it was a delay tactic. He said they wanted to starve us out legally. He asked if I had any cash on me or access to accounts. I shook my head no because they took my debit card. Mr. Henderson opened a drawer and pulled out a checkbook. He said as trustee he was authorizing an emergency stipend. He handed me a check for $5,000. He said buy clothes, buy food, get what you need. I stared at the check, having never seen that much money. I thanked him and put it in my pocket carefully. We left the office and went to the bank. I opened my own account under Mike's supervision. The teller looked at the check and then at me. She processed it without asking any questions. I withdrew $500 in cash, just in case. We went to a diner for a real meal. I ordered a burger and fries and ate like an animal. Mike watched me with a sad smile on his face. He said your dad would be proud of how you handled them. He said he always worried about Gary's influence. I asked Mike why Dad didn't tell me about the money. Mike said he didn't want you to be lazy. He said he wanted you to learn the value of work, but he also wanted to make sure you were never trapped. He knew if you had the money, Gary would try to take it. The irony was that the money caused the trap, but it also gave me the key to break out of it. My phone buzzed again and I saw a notification from Facebook. My mother had posted a long status update. She wrote about how her son was being brainwashed. She said an estranged friend was keeping us apart. Hundreds of people were commenting, sending prayers. She was spinning the narrative to make me look lost. I showed the phone to Mike and he frowned. He said don't engage with them on social media. He said anything you write can be used in court. I wanted to scream the truth to everyone. I wanted to post the photos of my bags on the lawn. But I put the phone away and finished my burger. We went to the mall to buy me some new clothes. It felt weird spending money without asking permission. I bought jeans and shirts and a good pair of shoes. I felt like I was rebuilding my identity from scratch. As we walked to the car, I saw a shadow move. Someone was watching us from across the parking lot. It was Gary's truck parked 2 rows over. He was sitting in the driver's seat, just watching. He didn't approach us, he just sat there. It was a power move meant to intimidate me. Mike saw him too, and his jaw tightened. He said get in the truck and lock the door. We drove out of the lot and Gary followed us. He stayed 2 cars behind us the whole way. Mike took a series of random turns to lose him. He drove through neighborhoods and down alleyways. Gary persisted like a predator stalking prey. Mike finally pulled into the police station parking lot. Gary slowed down at the entrance and then sped off. He was not stupid enough to confront us there. Mike went inside and filed a report about the stalking. He said we were going to install cameras at his house. We spent the rest of the afternoon putting up security. I helped him drill holes and run wires. It felt good to do something physical with my hands. By sunset, the house was a fortress. We watched the monitors from the living room TV. Around 9 p.m., a car pulled up slowly. It was not Gary's truck, but a sedan. I didn't know. A woman got out and walked up to the front door. She was holding a clipboard and looking around. Mike said that is Child Protective Services. They wasted no time in sending someone out. Gary must have called in a false tip about my safety. Mike opened the door and invited her in. She introduced herself as Ms. Davis. She said she received a report of dangerous conditions. She said the report claimed I was being held against my will. She said the report mentioned drugs and weapons. I looked at Mike in disbelief at the accusations. Mike stayed calm and showed her around the house. He showed her my clean room and the fridge full of food. He showed her the security system we just installed. Ms. Davis interviewed me alone in the kitchen. She asked if I felt safe here with Mike. I told her yes, and that Gary was the danger. I told her about the car following us today. She took notes and nodded her head slowly. She said the house seemed safe, and I seemed healthy. She said the report appeared to be unfounded. However, she said there would be a follow-up visit. She left and we locked the door behind her. I felt exhausted by the constant attacks. They were throwing everything at the wall to see what stuck. Mike poured us both a glass of water. He said they are getting desperate, kid. He said that means we are winning. I went to bed but kept one eye open. The cameras outside picked up movement at 2 a.m. I woke up and checked the monitor by my bed. Gary was standing at the end of the driveway. He was just standing there smoking a cigarette. He was staring at the house like he owned it. I woke Mike up and we watched him together. Mike called the police, but Gary left before they arrived. The police took a statement, but said they couldn't do much. He was technically on public property, the street. The next few days were a blur of lawyers and fear. We met with a private investigator Mike hired. He dug into Gary's financials and found the truth. Gary was deep in debt with gambling bookies. He owed over $50,000 to bad people. That explained his desperation for my trust fund. He needed that money to save his knee. My mother probably didn't even know the extent of it. She was just the puppet he used to get to me. The investigator said Gary was dangerous right now. A man with that kind of debt has nothing to lose. We decided to stay at a hotel for a few nights. It was too risky to stay at Mike's house. We packed bags and left through the back way. We checked into a Suites hotel under a fake name. It felt like being in witness protection. I missed school and my friends were texting me. I couldn't tell them where I was or why. I felt isolated and lonely despite Mike's help. One night my phone rang and it was my sister. She was crying hysterically on the other end. She said Mom and Gary were fighting, screaming. She said Gary punched a hole in the wall. She was scared and didn't know what to do. I felt a surge of protective anger. I told her to go to her room and lock the door. I told her I would call the police to help her. She begged me not to because Gary would be mad. She said please just come home and fix it. She said Gary said everything would stop if I came home. It was a trap using my sister as bait. I knew Gary was telling her to say that. He was standing right there coaching her. I told her I loved her, but I couldn't come there. I heard Gary's voice in the background yelling. The phone went dead and I stared at it. I called the police and gave them the address. I reported a domestic disturbance with a child present. I paced the hotel room waiting for news. Mike told me I did the right thing, but I felt guilty for putting her in the middle. An hour later, my mother called me from a new number. She was screaming that I ruined everything. She said the police took Gary away in handcuffs. She said CPS was taking my sister into custody. She blamed me for breaking up the family. She said if I just signed the adoption papers, none of this would happen. I yelled back that Gary did this, not me. I yelled that she chose a criminal over her kids. I hung up and blocked that number too. The silence in the hotel room was deafening. Mike put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed. He said, "You saved your sister tonight." He said getting her away from him was the best thing. But I knew the fallout was going to be massive. Gary would be out on bail eventually. He would be angrier than ever before, and now my mother hated me for real. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. I wondered if $7 million was worth this. I wondered if I should just give them some money to go away. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. They would burn through it and come back for more. I had to stand my ground for Dad's legacy. I had to be the man he wanted me to be. The next morning we got a call from Mr. Henderson. He said Gary's arrest changed everything. The judge would never grant adoption to a violent offender. The trust fund was secure from their grasp. But the battle was not over yet. My mother was filing for emergency custody of me. She was claiming Mike was alienating me from her. She was using Gary's arrest to play the victim card. She said she was a battered wife who needed her son. It was a smart strategy to win sympathy. Mr. Henderson said we needed to prepare for a showdown. We had to prove she was complicit in the abuse. We had to prove she knew about the gambling debts. We spent days gathering evidence and texts. I had to read through old messages where she insulted me. It was painful to relive the rejection, but it was necessary to build the case. The day of the final hearing arrived. The courthouse was packed with reporters. The story of the trust fund kid had leaked. Cameras flashed as we walked up the steps. I kept my head down and ignored the questions. Inside the courtroom, my mother sat alone. She looked smaller and older than before. Gary was not there because of the restraining order. The judge was the same one as before. She looked tired and ready to end this. My mother's lawyer argued that she was a victim to. He said she wanted to rebuild her family without Gary. He said she loved me and wanted me home. Then it was Mr. Henderson's turn to speak. He played the voicemail of her blaming me for the arrest. He showed the photos of my stuff in trash bags. He showed the financial records of Gary's debts. He painted a picture of greed and neglect. My mother sobbed loudly during the presentation. I felt a twinge of pity, but I squashed it. She made her choice when she kicked me out. The judge took a recess to deliberate. We sat in the hallway eating vending machine crackers. Mike told me, "Whatever happens, we are okay." He said, "You are stronger than you think." The bailiff called us back in for the ruling. The judge adjusted her robes and looked at us. She said the evidence was overwhelming. She denied my mother's petition for custody. She granted permanent guardianship to Mike. She also ordered a review of my sister's placement. My mother let out a wail that echoed in the room. She looked at me with pure hatred in her eyes. She screamed that I was an ungrateful brat. She screamed that I would die alone with my money. The bailiff escorted her out, still screaming. I sat there feeling numb, but free. The legal battle was finally over. I was safe, and the money was safe. But I had lost my mother forever. We walked out of the courthouse into the sun. The reporters were gone, and it was quiet. Mike asked me what I wanted to do now. I said I wanted to go see my sister. We drove to the foster home where she was placed. I talked to the caseworker about helping her. I told her I would use the trust to pay for her care. I wanted to make sure she had everything she needed. I saw her playing in the yard with a doll. She ran to me and hugged me tight. She asked when we could go home. I didn't have the heart to tell her, never. I told her we were going to build a new home, one without yelling and without fear. Leaving her there was the hardest thing I did. But I swore I would get her out soon. Mike and I drove back to his house. We took the boards off the windows. We ordered pizza and sat on the porch. It was over, but the scars were fresh. I had the money, and I had my freedom. But I wondered if I did the right thing. My mother was alone and broken. My sister was in the system for now. Gary was likely planning his revenge. I looked at the stars and asked Dad for a sign. I wondered if he knew it would get this bad. Maybe he did, and that's why he did it. He forced the truth into the light. He exposed them for who they really were. I took a sip of soda and looked at Mike. I asked him if family is blood or bond. He said family is who has your back when it counts. I knew he was right. I was rich in money but poor in blood relations. But I had Mike and I had my self-respect. I decided to use the money to go to law school. I wanted to help kids like me who were used. I wanted to fight for the ones without a trust fund. But tonight I just wanted to sleep. I went to my room and closed the door. I looked at the checkbook on the desk. It was a lot of zeros, but just paper. It couldn't buy a mother who loved me. It couldn't buy a childhood I never had. But it could buy a future where I was safe. And that was enough for now. Final question for the comments. Do you think I should have paid off my stepdad's debt to keep the family together, or was I right to let them face the consequences alone?